welcome back to Literazzi. My name is Nicolette, and today we are reading Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is one of my favorite books, and if you would like to support this channel, you can go ahead and buy this book. The link is down in our description below. Without further ado, let's get into it. Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus. Chapter 1. I am by birth a Genovese, and my family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. My ancestors had been, for many years, counselors and syndics, and my father had filled several public stations with honor and reputation. He was respected by all who knew him for his integrity and his indefatigable attention to public business. He passed his younger days perpetually occupied by the affairs of his country. A variety of circumstances had prevented his marrying early, nor was it until the decline of life that he became a husband and the father of a family. As the circumstances of his marriage illustrate his character, I cannot refrain from relating them. One of his most intimate friends was a merchant who, from a flourishing state, fell through numerous mischances into poverty. This man, whose name was Beaufort, was of proud and unbending disposition, and could never bear to live in poverty and oblivion in the same country where he had formerly been distinguished for his rank and magnificence. Having paid his debts, therefore, in the most honorable manner, he retreated with his daughter to the town of Lucerne, where he lived unknown and in wretchedness. My father loved Beaufort with the truest friendship and was deeply grieved by his retreat in these unfortunate circumstances. He bitterly deplored the false pride which led his friend to a conduct so worthy of the affection that united them. He lost no time in endeavoring to seek him out, with the hope of persuading him to begin the world again through his credit and assistance. Beaufort had taken effectual measures to conceal himself, and it was 10 months before my father discovered his abode. Overjoyed at this discovery, he hastened to the house, which was situated in a mean street near the Rus. But when he entered, misery and despair alone welcomed him. Beaufort had saved but a very small sum of money from the wreck of his fortunes, but it was sufficient to provide him with sustenance for some months, and in the meantime he hoped to procure some respectable employment in a merchant's house. The interval was consequently spent in inaction. His grief only became more deep and rankling when he had the leisure for reflection, and at length it took so fast hold of his mind that at the end of 3 months he lay on a bed of sickness, incapable of any exertion. His daughter attended him with the greatest tenderness, but she saw despair that their little fund was rapidly decreasing, and that there was no other prospect of support. But Caroline Beaufort possessed a mind of an uncommon mold, and her courage rose to support her in her adversity. She procured plain work, she plaited straw, and by various means contrived to earn a pittance scarcely sufficient to support life. Several months passed in this manner. Her father grew worse, her time more entirely occupied in attending him, her means of subsistence decreased, and in the 10th month her father died in her arms, leaving her an orphan and a beggar. This last blow overcame her, and she knelt by Beaufort's coffin, weeping bitterly, when my father entered the chamber. He came like a protecting spirit to the poor girl, who committed herself to his care, and after the interment of his friend, he conducted her to Geneva and placed her under the protection of relation. 2 years after this event, Caroline became his wife. There was a considerable difference in the ages of my parents, but this circumstance seemed to unite them only closer in bonds of devoted affection. There was a sense of justice in my father's upright mind, which rendered it necessary that he should approve highly to love strongly. Perhaps, during former years, he had suffered from the late discovered unworthiness of one beloved, and so was disposed to set a greater value on tried worth. There was a show of gratitude and worship in his attachment to my mother, differing wholly from the doting fondness of age, for it was inspired by reverence for her virtues and a desire to be the means of, in some degree, recompensing her for the sorrows which she had endured, but which had inexpressible grace to his behavior to her. Everything was mailed to yield to her wishes and her convenience. He strove to shelter her, as a far exotic is sheltered by the gardener, from every rougher wind, to surround her with all that could tend to excite pleasurable emotion in her soft and benevolent mind. Her health, and even the tranquility of her hitherto constant spirit, had shaken by what she had gone through. During the 2 years that had elapsed previous to their marriage, my father had gradually relinquished all of his public functions, and immediately after their union, they sought the pleasant climate of Italy, and the change of scene and interest attendant on a tour through that land of wonders as a restorative for her weakened frame. From Italy, they visited Germany and France. I, their eldest child, was born at Naples, and as an infant accompanied them in their rambles. I remained for several years their only child. Much as they attached to each other, they seemed to draw inexhaustible stores of affection from the very mine of love to bestow them upon me. My mother's tender caresses and my father's smile of benevolent pleasure while regarding me are my first recollections. I was their plaything and their idol, and something better, their child. The innocent and helpless creature bestowed on them by heaven, whom to bring up to good and whose future lot it was in their hands to direct to happiness or misery, according as they fulfilled their duties towards me. With this deep consciousness of what they owed towards being to which they had given to life, added to the active spirit of tenderness that animated both, it may be imagined that while during every hour of my infant life I received a lesson of patience, of charity, and of self-control, I was so guided by the silken cord that all seemed but one train of enjoyment to me. For a long time, I was their only care. My mother had much desired to have a daughter, but I continued their single offspring. When I was about 5 years old, while making an excursion beyond the frontiers of Italy, they passed a week on the shores of the Lake of Como. Their benevolent disposition often made them enter the cottages of the poor. This, to my mother, was more than a duty. It was a necessity, a passion. Remembering what she had suffered and how she had been relieved, for her to act in her turn to turn the guardian angel to the afflicted. During one of their walks, a poor cot in the foldings of a veil attracted their notice as being singularly disconsolate, while the number of half-clothed children gathered about it spoke of the penury of its worst shape. One day, when my father had gone by himself to Milan, my mother, accompanied by me, visited this abode. She found a peasant and his wife, hard-working, bent down by care and labor, distributing a scanty meal to 5 hungry babes. Among these there was one which attracted my mother far above the rest. She appeared of a different stock. The 4 others were dark-eyed, hardy little vagrants. This child was thin and very fair. Her hair was the brightest living gold, and despite the poverty of her clothing, seemed to be set a crown of distinction on her head. Her brow was clear and ample, her blue eyes cloudless, and her lips and the molding of her face so expressive a sensibility and sweetness that none could behold her without looking on her as a distinct species, a being heaven sent, and bearing a celestial stamp in all her features. The peasant woman, perceiving that my mother fixed eyes of wonder and admiration on this lovely girl, eagerly communicated her history. She was not her child, but the daughter of a Milanese nobleman. Her mother was a German and had died on giving her birth. The infant had been placed with these good people to nurse, and they were better off then. They had not been long married, and their eldest child was but just born. The father of their charge was one of those Italian nursed in the memory of the antique glory of Italy, one among the schiavi agnor fermenti who exerted himself to obtain the liberty of his country. He became the victim of its weakness. Whether he had died or still lingered in the dungeons of Austria was not known. His property was confiscated. His child became an orphan and a beggar. She continued with her foster parents and bloomed in their rude abode, fairer than the garden rose among the dark levied brambles. When my father returned from Milan, he found playing with me in the hall of our villa a child fairer than pictured cherub, a creature who seemed to shed radiance from her looks, and whose form and motions were lighter than the chemise of the hills. The apparition was soon explained. With his permission, my mother prevailed on her rustic guardians to yield their charge to her. They were fond of the sweet orphan. Her presence had seemed a blessing to them, but it would be unfair to her to keep her in poverty and want. When Providence afforded her such powerful protection, they consulted their village priest, and the result was that Elizabeth Lavenza became the inmate of my parents' house, my more than sister, the beautiful and adored companion of all my occupations and my pleasures. Everyone loved Elizabeth. The passionate and almost reverential attachment with which all regarded her became, while I shared it, my pride and my delight. On the evening previous to her being brought to my home, my mother had playfully said, "I have a pretty present for my Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it." And when on the morrow she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift, I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally and looked upon Elizabeth as mine to protect, love, and cherish. All praises bestowed upon her I received as made to a possession of my own. We called each other familiarly by the name of cousin. No word, no expression could body forth the kind of relation in which she stood to me. My more than sister, since till death she was to be mine only. That was the end of Chapter 1 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I absolutely adore this novel. I have huge respect for Mary Shelley. Many believe that this was truly the beginning of the gothic horror genre as we know it today. And I think there's such beauty. I highly encourage anyone to look into her life. She was very young. Many people know the overall story that she came up with Frankenstein when she was with a group of writers away with her husband, and she posed a challenge for everyone to write their scariest story, which is very apropos because I am reading this during spooky season. And she had just suffered a miscarriage of her first child, and she really just kind of ironically pieced together this tale of horror and loss and obsession and love that really comes through to the most just like human nature of all of us. And you can feel the pain in so many of these pages. I really can't say enough great things about this book. I absolutely adore this book. If you have not gotten enough of Frankenstein yet, you can actually see my reaction to the original 1931 film adaptation of it over on Popcorn Roulette. You're going to see that link right over here. You can give that a click. Thank you so much for joining me for this particular episode of Literazzi. Once again, my name is Nicolette. If you have not yet done so, please like, subscribe. Let us know what you'd like for us to read next. And I'll meet you in the library.